I woke up disoriented, the faint smell of smoke stinging my nose. "Do you smell that?" I muttered, bolting upright in my bunk. Gray wisps curled from the ceiling vents, and a flickering red warning light relic of Cold War paranoia pulsed in the corner. A siren, silent for decades, screamed to life above me. Heart pounding, I thought we were under attack. I grabbed my flashlight, yanked on my boots, and scrambled up the emergency ladder, climbing toward the surface like my life depended on it. It probably did. Nothing could have prepared me for what I saw when I cracked open the camouflaged hatch. A bulldozer loomed over my bunker, its metal jaws inches from my main air shaft. The ground was torn uppity, reckless, like a bad first shave. Workers in orange vests swarmed, pouring concrete. A banner flapped above, future site of Pine Grove Community Hall, grand opening this Saturday. It hit me like a punch. The HOA, the same one that once fined my neighbor for planting zucchini too close to the curb, had just crossed a line. They'd paved over it. I hauled myself out and stormed across the lot, arms flailing. A worker raised an eyebrow. "Whoa, where'd you come from?" I ignored him, demanding the person in charge. Enter Susan, short bob, clipboard in one hand, iced vanilla latte in the other. She sized me up like I was a stray sock in a laundromat. "Sir, you're trespassing on HOA-managed property," she said, her voice a mix of customer service bot and smug superiority. "Trespassing?" I choked, pointing at the smoking air shaft. "You're the ones trespassing. This is my land. That bunker's mine. You're sealing a shelter authorized by the feds before your subdivision was even a blueprint." Her eyes narrowed, but the smirk stayed. "Funny," she said, sipping her overpriced drink. "Our records show this lot's community property. Your little hideout's history." I bit back a reply to avoid trouble, turned, and climbed back down the ladder. A worker's laugh followed me. Guy lives underground like a gopher. Inside, I fired up the console and opened a steel locker untouched for years. Inside were blueprints, stamped by the Department of Civil Defense. My bunker was part of a 1960s pilot program. While other kids played tag, I trailed my dad, an engineer on these shelters. Years later, with my own federal clearance, I built mine deeper, stronger, a civilian fortress. The project charter even had a clause preserving the land for 50 years post-program. I'd never needed it. Until now. I scanned the documents and emailed my friend Tom, still in Federal Infrastructure Review. Subject, urgent, land dispute. I attached the charter. Then I checked the deed records online. Sure enough, my name was still on the original zoning registry. I'd never sold the parcel. Susan's takeover hinged on a review said neighborhood plan, but she hadn't legally secured my land. It was a small mistake, but enough to unravel her scheme. Next morning, I hit the HOA office to protest. Susan wasn't in, but her assistant, a jittery guy named Carl, paled when I dropped the blueprint tubes on the counter with a thud. "What are these?" he stammered. I leaned in. "EVI Denke. Tell Susan the HOA just picked a fight with a federal facility." He laughed nervously, but his trembling hand said he believed me. That afternoon, Susan held a board meeting to squash my complaint. I wasn't invited but sat quietly in the back. She gave a speech about community progress, calling me an unregistered squatter. She unveiled a new HOA map swallowing my plot into a communal green zone. Residents clapped, but some looked uneasy. I waited for the open comment session, then took the mic. "One question," I said. "When was this map updated?" Susan sighed. 3 months ago, board approved." I smiled. "Did the board see the original deeds?" She froze. "Because county records show that land was never transferred, and the bunker's protected under federal law. You didn't just build over an asset, you might have committed a felony sealing it." Silence. Susan's face drained of color. Carl dropped his pen. A board member whispered, "Is that true?" Susan stammered, "No one knew there was a shelter." I held up an old aerial map showing the hatch. "Maybe you didn't look hard enough." I left before they could respond. Tom replied that night, "Flagged it. DHS will contact you in 72 hours. Stop any more concrete." I grinned. Susan had laid the foundation for her own ruin. The grand opening of Pine Grove's Hall was a circus bounce house, brass band, and Susan in a neon blazer, grinning like she'd won an election. She stood at the podium, declaring, "This is Pine Grove's Futuria, place where community thrives and rules matter." I lingered at the crowd's edge, hat low. My bunker hummed beneath their polished floor, its systems back online. And one was about to steal the show. Midway through Susan's ribbon cutting, a VY Bration rattled the stage. A low thrum echoed, like distant thunder. She laughed it off, old pipes, but the tremors grew. A hidden panel near the stage shifted, hissing air. A trap door, buried under laminate, creaked open. The crowd froze. The fire marshal, standing at the back, frowned. Was this in the design? Susan blinked. No, just a storage hatch. He wasn't convoying said. Flashlight in hand, he descended the narrow stairs into what they thought was a quirky basement. Seconds passed. Then sirens deep, Cold War-era wails blared through hidden vents. The marshal reemerged, pale. Shut this down. Now. Susan tried to interrupt, but he snapped. This isn't a cellar, it's a federal facility. You build over a classified shelter. This could be obstruction. The crowd went silent. Residents edged toward the exits. Susan, flailing, demanded his supervisor. He replied coldly, "You'll meet more than my supervisor, ma'am." I walked home, keeping an eye on the news. By evening, local outlets buzzed about mysterious infrastructure at Pine Grove. It was just the start. Next morning, a block number called. "Owner of the Hawkstone shelter?" a voice asked. I hadn't heard that code in years. "Yes. We're reactivating its federal status. Expect inspection teams in a week. Prevent further obstruction." I hung up, knowing my next move. At the county clerk's office, I dug into zoning records. The HOA's new maps included my parcel, but they'd used a flawed digital overlay, ignoring the original paper map. They hadn't accounted for the bunker's half-block subterranean footprint. Back home, I checked my archive. The plans showed a second entrance, hidden under the playground, a hatch I hadn't used in a decade. It was about to become very relevant. That night, the HOA held an emergency meeting. Susan, looking haggard, called the incident a plumbing glitch. But Carl, clutching a DHS memo I'd anonymously sent to authorities, wasn't buying it. The memo's classification tag screamed trouble. I stood in the back, waiting. When they opened the floor, Susan tried to silence me. "He's harassed us," she shrieked. But residents, smelling blood, shouted, "Let him speak." I took the mic. "I warned you. You thought I was a crank with old blueprints. But you built your hall over a federal shelter, a legacy protected by law. That mistake's about to cost you everything." Susan fumbled, but a board member cut in. "Are the feds really involved?" I nodded. "You'll know when the next car here has government plates and field kits." I walked out, levying silence in my wake. At the courthouse, I filed for repossession under federal infrastructure protection rules. The clerk's indifference vanished when he saw the folder deeds, ownership papers, and CIVYL defense letters with federal seals. Within an hour, I sat with a county supervisor, a land officer, and a federal rep. I laid out the bunker's history, the HOA's oversight, and photos of the hatch under Susan's prized floor. The Fed, a sharp-eyed woman, said, "We'll handle it." I left, feeling the tide turn. That afternoon, Carl called, panicked. "They're here, government guys." They taped off the hall. Susan's unraveling. He admitted she'd accused me of forgery, but a board member verified my title. I said nothing. The next day, yellow tape surrounded the hall. A federal notice declared it under restricted review. Susan called it an audit, but when ground radar scanned the playground right above my second hatcher, story cracked. Inside the HOA boardroom, chaos reigned. "Why didn't you check the deeds?" a member demanded. Susan blamed everyone but herself. Then came the knockout. Carl leaked audio of her admitting to redrawing maps without approval. It hit social media like wildfire. Residents demanded her resignation. Some protested outside her house with signs like "Unfair HOA" and "Free the bunker." I stayed quiet, letting the dominoes fall. The feds granted me full access to the bunker and surface land. But I didn't stop there. I offered the HOA a lease for the hall's landscape, high rent, monthly inspections, and a public disclaimer it wasn't theirs. Susan refused to read it, but the board, desperate, voted yes. The hall was mine on paper, and they'd pay me monthly, the guy they'd called a nobody. Susan stormed my property one day, ranting, "You think you've won?" I pointed to a news sign. Warning, federal continuity property. Unauthorized access prohibited. She backed off. Carl quit. Susan was ousted, investigated for fraud and obstruction. The board apologized publicly. I skipped their ceremony, tinkering underground. The bunker's systems, Untouched for 20 years, still hummed perfectly. So did the truth. The hall became a ghost town. Red signs warned of federal monitoring. Residents avoided it. Kids were told to steer clear. I leased nearby land to a Sir V.Y. Valist group for training. Tents sprouted where soccer games once played. Drills ran weekly earthquakes, blackouts, evacuations. Susan's online petition to stop it flopped. The land was mine, legally untouchable. When Susan sent her cousin's security firm to inspect, they crossed the line. One guard got a stun baton to the leg after ignoring warnings. No charges except a fine for trespassing. The news ran a headline, HOA's crown jewel becomes training ground. Susan's mid-yell photo went viral. The board relocated meetings to a strip mall, their empire humbled. I hosted a CIVYC readiness fair, food trucks, served YVAL games, fire department talks. The county loved it. DHS sent a certificate, Tier 2 emergency resource site. I could expand with federal support. The hall? I scheduled its demolition. Susan begged me to stop, citing history. I replied, that's why it's coming down. As the concrete crumbled, I felt no need to cheer. I'd won. The lot cleared. I rebuilt secure hatches, solar lights, biometric locks. The bunker became an official emergency hub. At a quiet dedication, I unveiled a plaque. When the ground is taken, dig deeper. Monthly training started. Kids VY cited, asking about air filters. News called me the man who outplanned the HOA. A few grumbled, but most brought cookies, asked about solar panels. The neighborhood exhaled. One day, Carl stopped by. Thanks, he said. I learned a lot. I nodded. Best lessons come when things break. Alone in the bunker, I logged one last entry. Facility secured. Land restored. Community stable. Let history remember who dug first. Above, the sun rose. I wasn't hiding anymore. They tried to bury me, but my roots ran too deep.